Greetings. I'm joined today by Kimberly Heckler, author of a book just published about a remarkable woman who I actually had the chance of getting to know when she served in the Reagan administration. The book, A Woman of Firsts, Margaret Heckler, Political Trailblazer. Kimberly, welcome.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to get a chance to talk with you. I want to talk about the book, but I want to talk a little bit first about you because I'd kind of like to introduce you to our community since on August 7th, you will be in Easton at 5 p.m. for a champagne reception, book discussion, and I suspect signing at the Ebenezer. And I just think that's wonderful that you're coming into the community. So tell us first a little bit about yourself. I think you live in Virginia. And how did this book come about?
So I do live in Arlington, Virginia, but we're spending at least half time here on the Eastern Shore. So we're absolutely been down here for 21 years, and it is such an honor that the Prager family is having this venue, and it will be a beautiful time to come out to for this champagne reception and book talk.
Couldn't think of
I
anything better in the warm weather that we're experiencing.
Exactly. So I started working on the book about 10 years ago when Margaret was still alive. And really, Sunday night dinners. We invited Margaret. She lived in Arlington, right down the street from me for over 30 years.
And
I'm married to her
you are her daughter-in-law,
daughter
right?
in law.
Okay.
I am her daughter-in-law. And so the stories that she would share, some of them were stories we heard over and over. And a lot of those were when she was given away at birth. And so we followed those stories with her as she shared, but it wasn't until I was tasked with opening up 70 or 80 boxes in local Arlington storage that I uncovered letters from Nixon asking her to be the first woman Supreme Court justice, and
Wow.
letters from Ted Kennedy and letters from President Reagan saying, yeah, would you like to be Secretary of Health and Human Services? It was these things that made me realize that here in my midst was a historical character. And yet her story had not been told. There is not a book out there on Margaret Heckler. There are many, many books that mention her, but this is a true biography.
And you're pretty committed, I believe, to actually keeping track of women in history. Aren't you involved with the Library of Congress project in this area?
I am, yes. So I joined the Library of Congress Women's Group, which allowed me for at least 7 years to go in and meet with this group of women. And they were very influential and encouraging for me on my path toward getting the book published.
I think one of the things that struck me was the beginnings, and I will say that and I always feel badly when I read a biography or a book about somebody I really got to know well while serving in government, because what happens is you get to know them well, but you know just a few years about their life. You're so involved in so many things, you don't get to know the full person. And your book does such a beautiful job of explaining the difficult challenges and early times that Margaret went through, which obviously shaped her to be the person she was, to break all kinds of barriers over the course of a lifetime, from law school to debate teams, and of course, high levels of government. But tell us a little bit about what you discovered in those early years.
So in the early years, what I discovered truly that her path was almost divinely led, because there were many, many times where her life could have been taken from her. And surely her father and mother were going to leave her in Ireland to be raised there, and that would have given her a very different outcome. She would have never become a congresswoman, an HHS cabinet secretary, nor the ambassador to Ireland. So the story is kind of full circle, because you start with Irish immigrant parents that are impoverished, come to America, and the story ends after her congressional and cabinet years as the most powerful American in Ireland, as the first woman ambassador to Ireland. And she broke barriers, not just for herself as she went along, but she pulled women along with her. And that's when we know that she authored the law in Congress on the banking committee to write the law for women to get credit and credit cards in their own names. And 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of women's right to credit.
It's incredible. You know, it would be easy for somebody to hear this and assume that this was one tough, hard to deal with individual. She was tough and strong, but I think one of the stories that kind of said it all for me, and one I didn't know until I read the book, was how she met her husband. And the reason I say it said it all is because she's passionate about debating. She worked, she studied, she prepared, and she went into an environment that women didn't historically at the time prove to be too successful at. And she ran up against one Mr. Heckler, young Mr. Heckler,
Yes,
who she defeated
that's
in the
true.
debate. But her charm led her to win the guy. She ultimately they met and they dated and they were married, which I think is it's a marvelous story. And I would fast forward to say in the Reagan White House, there were always people concerned when they learned that Secretary Heckler was coming in to see President Reagan because there was no telling what he might agree to. She always
True.
was passionate about problems she identified. She was she was a good debater, and she went up against David Stockman, the head of Office of Management and Budget, who was trying to control spending. But lo and behold, and I think in an area that proved to save literally thousands and thousands, if not millions, of lives, AIDS, she really convinced the president that this HIV virus, while we didn't know everything about it, we actually had to get in full bore to deal with this healthcare crisis over the objections of some who thought spending was going to go through the roof. But I give her a lot of credit because I watched her work that kind of magic, and of course she won over President Reagan and Vice President Bush and many of us as she continued to serve.
She also, when she came in there, yes, AIDS was the fatal pandemic of the 1980s. You remember, and we're 50 years fast forwarded. We all went through COVID. So those times I can only slightly remember the AIDS pandemic, but people died. There was no cure until she got a hold of this at the helm. And so, yes, the Reagan administration, you remember, was very quiet on this. Whoever was in the kitchen cabinet talking to Reagan, it was an issue that they were hoping to maybe um, uh, hold off for a while. And
Right.
Margaret just brought it out full bore. You're right. She absolutely talked to Reagan and Ed Meese about this because, well, first of all, these people needed our help. But second of all, in addition to helping to find a cure and to not have people die from this disease, but also to protect our blood supply. That was important. If you got in a car accident and you went to the hospital and you weren't sure what blood supply was being drawn from, it was a scare. People stopped using water fountains. Hospital nurses did not bring plates into AIDS patients' rooms. And Margaret went out and kissed them and hugged them and showed the world that this was not contagious in this way, and getting her blood drawn herself. So she really was a maverick. Um,
True.
and when you were saying she was tough, she was in some ways, but I tell you, she was extremely feminine and she loved men. And that was because as she went through her life and decided to become a lawyer with as the only woman in her class, and of course she was accepted into Harvard Law first, but they didn't want her because she was a woman. You know, she experienced this along the way, but she really didn't look at men as her enemy. She realized I can do this just as well as them, and so I will. But it didn't come with a quote pissy attitude, if you will. It came from I'm armed enough intellectually to be able to present a case. And if I can change an era for women, then I will do so because looking at the credit issue again, she was a congresswoman and a lawyer and couldn't walk into a bank to get credit in 1970s. And so it was landmark legislation. And then Title IX she co-sponsored, the Equal Rights Amendment. She had a torch up for women finally being put in the Constitution. for more than just the right to vote. But she
Pretty,
did it in a very feminine way.
she did,
She was, yes,
and pretty remarkable for a young woman who started out to be I think a concert pianist,
yes.
and then redirected her life. And we're so fortunate she did. Let me ask you this, because we're gonna wrap up here. But as you get out and visit with people, as you will do on August 7th at 5 p.m. at the Ebenezer, what resonates with people? What are they interested in?
I think they're interested to know and they're interested in being inspired by reading the story about a moderate Republican, a woman in a man's world, and a Republican in a Democratic state. And I think if there's a way that we can learn from history, which is the only way we can learn, and that we can bring it back to those grand days of being able to cross the aisle easily. Her and Ted Kennedy worked together on so many projects when he was Senator of Massachusetts and she was in the House in Massachusetts. Tip O'Neill, one of her best friends, he was the one that worked with her when she started the Congresswoman's Caucus, the very first women's group in the Congress to deal with issues that specifically dealt with women. Things like breast cancer being tested only on men and male rats. I mean, things needed to be changed, and Margaret Heckler was there to change the entire landscape.
Well, Kimberly Heckler, thank you so much for taking 10 years out of your life and giving us this book. It really is an inspiration, and we need this kind of leadership now more than ever. And we look forward to
Yes.
having you in Easton on August 7th. Thanks for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you very much.